The story begins on Megiddo. On the narrow bridge below, Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi was leading a frontline assault against the Separatist forces. The wind roared around the clones as Commander Bacara received a message. He could barely hear the orders coming through the Megiddo's loud wind, so he was sure he misheard it. He redirected the message to all other clones and listened to it again, but he heard the exact same thing. Execute Order 66. Clones suddenly stopped with heavy steps in the snowy floor. They looked at each other, unsure what to do. Mundi turned around in confusion. Then, suddenly, a clone behind Mundi lifted his blaster and shot at his back. Mundi blocked and redirected the bolt back at the clone. Bacara screamed, "Stand down!" But it didn't help. A few other clones started blasting in panic as Mundi just barely managed to deflect all the blaster bolts. Bacara lifted his hands, screaming for troopers to stop, but then a blaster bolt flew right through his chest. Mundi didn't have time to decide who to kill. He just had to get out of there, now. Clones fell one after another. Suddenly, Mundi leapt high in the air and started making his escape. As the few remaining clones started running after him, Bacara watched Mundi running away in panic as he collapsed into the cold, unforgiving snow. On Felucia, Isla Secura was looking in shock as Commander Bly was explaining the orders that just came in. Some troops were confused. They didn't know what to do. Do they just fire at the general already? All of their brothers were committing treason, but eventually they decided to stand down. Meanwhile, Palpatine was standing before his advanced computers, waiting for the reports to come in. And in all honesty, the Dark Lord was somewhat on edge. All of his effort through the last, who knows how many, decades came down to this exact moment. There was a lingering doubt in his mind, something he had suspected for many months. Although the clones were bred for battle, for loyalty, they had grown incredibly close with their Jedi generals. It is true, war brings people closer. The reports were coming in. 100 reports of Jedi executions, then 200, then 300, but it wasn't enough. Palpatine clenched his fists. He knew what was happening. Suddenly, he received a transmission from Lord Vader. A hooded figure suddenly illuminated Palpatine's office. Anakin spoke. "Master, I'm sorry, but my own battalion turned on me. They refused to follow their orders. I barely made an escape as they turned on me." Palpatine felt something he didn't feel in a very long time. It was fear, not rage, not hatred, but the very basic emotion leading to the dark side, fear. He called Vader to his secret underground chambers in 500 Republica. As always, he had a plan B. A couple of standard hours later, Master Dralig and Jurok nervously made their way to the Chancellor's office. Many council members were nowhere to be found. Some workers from the Eastern Jedi hangar reported seeing the Masters leave toward Palpatine's apartment a couple of hours ago. Before they could enter Palpatine's office, they were met by royal guards and even some Holonet reporters. Ma Sameda was standing in the corner with a blank expression. The security reluctantly let the Jedi Masters enter. On the floor were the bodies of Agent Kolar, Saesitine, and Kit Fisto. The Jedi Masters watched in shock as investigation droids hovered above the fallen Jedi, scanning their bodies. They sensed rage in the people around them. Jedi always had permission to intervene in this kind of situation. However, considering that the Chancellor himself was missing, this very much looked like an assassination attempt. Royal guards were reportedly only knocked out far from where the dead Jedi Masters were found. So who, or what, could possibly have killed them? And even more important to most people of the Republic, where was the Supreme Chancellor? Slowly but surely, Jedi Masters and Knights started returning from around the galaxy. They all looked tired and confused. Master Mundi, Yoda, Kenobi were among them. They were shaken, but ready to act. They all had many things to discuss. What would they do with the clones? Some of them followed the orders, but it wasn't really their fault. If anything, this showed they could be trusted even further, as many didn't execute the direct orders from the Supreme Chancellor. So Obi-Wan decided to see if Padme knew anything about this. Obi-Wan had no idea where Anakin could be. Apparently, he was also seen flying toward the Chancellor's office, so he was probably dead like the other Masters. Windu's and Skywalker's bodies were missing, though. Obi-Wan nervously stepped out of his speeder and approached Padme. It wasn't a nice morning for her either. Obi-Wan asked if she perhaps knew where Anakin might be, but It was clear she had no idea. Obi-Wan decided it was better not to mention anything until more had been revealed, although the evidence strongly suggested that Skywalker was dead, so Obi-Wan reluctantly asked Padme for a favor. He had a mission from Yoda. Padme was the senator they trusted the most. He asked her to speak in front of the Senate and clear up the confusion about what actually happened. The whole situation with the clones was quite wild. They needed somebody trustworthy to clear up the confusion in the Senate and make it clear that the missing Chancellor executed the order to kill Jedi for no reason. They didn't commit any kind of treachery. So Padme agreed. She was exhausted and worried about Anakin, but duty came first. It was some time before the Senate gathered again after everything that happened. But then finally, Padme spoke, representing the Jedi Order, explaining Palpatine's treasonous plan. It was very far-fetched. You really had to know who the Sith were to understand how far they would go to destroy the Jedi. But for most senators, that sounded crazy. The Chancellor started the war to destroy the Jedi? It sounded ridiculous. But at least the public perception of the Jedi shifted, at least a little. Palpatine had tried to make the Jedi look like traitors, and some senators did see them like that. But without Palpatine in the Senate, his manipulations started to collapse. If only he could speak to the Senate, declaring the Jedi traitors. But he had to leave. The clones would turn on him, and there were way too many Jedi who survived Order 66. It was just not safe to stay on Coruscant whatsoever. So, in the end, the Senate was left without a clear leader, which was honestly perfect for Palpatine. Without clear leadership, their war efforts would fall short, which was important for Palpatine's future plans. The Council was confused beyond words. It was clear that Palpatine had to be the Sith Lord they were looking for, and he was still out there. Windu and Anakin were still missing. It was quite shocking. On Raxus' address, deep under the Separatist Senate chamber, Palpatine was sitting next to Dooku. By his side stood Vader. Palpatine and Dooku were discussing the future of the war. His cover was blown. It was time for the real war to begin. No more holding back the Separatists. It was time to crush the Republic with the droid army. Dooku and Vader exchanged a cold, awkward look from time to time. It was no secret that Dooku didn't like the intervention of Skywalker in his plans. This boy he had tried to destroy for years now stood by Palpatine, more powerful than ever. He was probably just a tool to Sidious, but if Vader was just a tool to him, was he, Dooku, as well? He was fine with Savage and Ventress, but Anakin was his rival, especially now, fully consumed by the dark side. He was a real threat, and Dooku didn't like his involvement one bit. Vader mostly felt the same. Palpatine was no fool. He knew he'd have to get rid of Dooku very soon, but he needed him now more than ever. The Republic turned against him. He was desperate. He needed the Separatists to win, which he knew wouldn't be a hard task, especially with all the knowledge he possessed about the Republic's weaknesses. He had to proceed with grave care. Both Tyrannus and Vader could snap at any second, especially Vader. He had to make him believe that he could still save Padme. Perhaps he could distract him from her. Or then again, probably not. He really had to think all of this through, so in the following weeks, the war plan was set into motion with ruthless precision. The initial strike by the Separatists was as predictable as it was brutal. Kamino, the cloning world and secret backbone of the Republic's army. Palpatine, as the former Chancellor, had enormous knowledge of everything they needed to lead a successful strike on the planet. He possessed full knowledge of distress codes, planetary defense protocols, and the intricate security layers safeguarding the cloning facilities. The choice of target was clear: to cripple the Republic at its source. A massive Separatist armada, spearheaded by General Kalani, advanced relentlessly, converging on Kamino's swirling ocean. The planet's atmosphere shimmered under the assault as the Republic's defense fleet scrambled to intercept. The Kaminoan orbital defense grid was formidable, bolstered by a permanent stationing of Republic warships, including Venator-class star destroyers and numerous escort frigates. Yet, even this impressive shield could not stem the tide. Kalani's tactical command was merciless. His forces exploited every breach, overwhelming the defenders with ruthless efficiency. The Separatist cruisers unleashed a devastating bombardment, launching precise volleys of turbolaser fire that tore through the storm clouds and hammered the cloning facilities. Shield generators faltered under the sustained assault, while ion cannons disabled several key defense turrets, leaving vast sectors vulnerable. vulnerable. Below, the spires and domes of Tepoka City were engulfed in chaos. Troopers scrambled to repel boarding parties and ground assaults, but the relentless droid armies advanced methodically, clearing every defense node. Kalani's tactical command was merciless. His forces exploited every breach, overwhelming the defenders with ruthless efficiency. Communications were jammed, reinforcements delayed, and soon entire cloning vats were compromised or destroyed. The obliteration of Kamino's facilities was not just a tactical victory, but a strategic blow aimed straight at the heart of the Republic's war effort. This was nonetheless a catastrophic loss for the Republic. The Council was confused, and the Senate even more so. Even tactical admirals were surprised. Sure, CIS had a formidable army, but this wasn't the first time they tried launching an attack on Kamino. Why was it so much worse this time? And then they realized it. All this time, every battle, every step they took, the Chancellor was paving the path for them. Every victory and loss, Sidious had been coordinating with Dooku in their favor. They never stood a chance, especially now. Sidious knew all of their secrets, everything. They changed the distress codes and everything else Sidious could use against them immediately, but the real war really just began. Dooku, like always, stayed behind the curtains, advancing Sidious plans while Anakin led many droid battalions across different systems. Sidious didn't let him participate in bigger battles for now, just like he didn't use him on Kamino, because he wanted his greatest weapon to stay a secret. Palpatine knew that keeping Anakin on the dark side, and especially loyal to him, would be extremely difficult. Early on, it was easy. He promised him he could save his wife. He gave him hopes of ending the war, but now it was different. Anakin wanted to be with Padme. He didn't want any of this. That's not what he signed up for, especially considering he changed sides completely. He was now fighting not just against the so-called traitorous Jedi, but also clones, troopers he once fought with, laughed with. He was ingrained in the dark side, and there was no way back, but his loyalty was questionable. So Sidious knew he had to make a choice. The war was going beautifully. They had other cloning facilities like the ones on Conquered Dawn and Saleucamai, but the loss of Kamino was devastating. But even besides that, they were simply no match for the droids. Quantity was beating quality. It was that simple. Still, Palpatine decided that Vader was way too unpredictable. They needed to finish it now. If they could win the war swiftly and decisively, Palpatine just knew Vader would stay loyal, especially when they captured Padme. Dooku was extremely skeptical. He was glad the war was going well, but he believed it wasn't time to attack Coruscant yet. They needed more time, but Sidious didn't have any of that. Vader was too precious. If he wanted to see the end of the war, he would get the end of the war. The Republic was crumbling. It was time. So the droid army launched a relentless assault on the heart of the Republic itself, Coruscant. At the forefront of the offensive stood Darth Vader, commanding legions of battle droids with cold precision. Watching from the shadows were Sidious and Tyrannus, silent spectators to the unfolding chaos. Today, the Republic would fall. The Republic Navy scrambled to mount a desperate defense, engaging the overwhelming Separatist fleet in brutal space combat above the city planet. Venators and cruisers exchanged volleys of turbolaser fire with Separatist frigates and relentless waves of droid starfighters. But the numbers told a grim tale. Amidst the explosions and tracer fire, fleets maneuvered fiercely to prevent the blockade from tightening. Yet despite the Republic's valiant resistance, waves of battle droids began descending on Coruscant's gleaming spires and towering skylines. Dropships and gunships disgorged mechanized infantry onto the streets in staggering numbers, turning the metropolis into a sprawling battlefield. The Senate district was engulfed in fire and smoke as explosions shattered windows and rocked the dome chambers. Jedi generals fought alongside their clone troopers on the streets and rooftops, lightsabers against relentless waves of blaster-wielding droids. Blaster bolts streaked through the air in every direction, illuminating the smoke-filled streets in deadly bursts of light. Clone troopers fought bravely, cutting down droids with precision fire, but every kill was met by a dozen more marching relentlessly forward. The enemy advance was unceasing, an endless tide of metal and cold logic. Hope waned as communication lines faltered and coordinated counterattacks stalled. The Jedi, once symbols of hope and valor, found themselves overwhelmed, pushed back step by step. It was a devastating realization. Sidious manipulated them all, weaving them like puppets on his grand stage. There was never truly any hope. They were defeated before the battle even began. Thousands of Jedi fell during Order 66, and thousands would fall today. As the final lines broke, Jedi pilots scrambled to their starfighters, launching desperate runs through the chaos to break the suffocating blockade. The city was lost, the Republic's heart shattered beneath the merciless onslaught. In desperation, General Kenobi advanced toward his fighter, jumped in, and flew toward Padme's apartment. He felt like Padme was his responsibility. In reality, Obi-Wan knew that Padme was carrying twins, Anakin's children. He had to make sure Padme would make it off the planet. For his old friend. He just hoped that Ahsoka and other Jedi would also manage to escape before the Separatists took complete control. Droids were now marching through the Senate halls. Senators stood at the sides of the corridors, making sure not to disturb any of the countless battle droids. Soon, a hooded figure emerged from the chaos, walking toward the Senate chamber. At the Senate apartment complex, Obi-Wan finally landed his ship among the chaos. Nervously, he stepped out of the fighter and sprinted inside Padme's apartment. The transparasteel windows were shutting his way. Thankfully, he solved it quickly with his lightsaber. Inside, the apartment was empty. He ran toward the other veranda where Padme sometimes sat. As he stepped outside, all he saw was smoke. Then suddenly, an explosion nearby illuminated a figure in front of him. He saw it. Somebody was carrying an unconscious Padme somewhere. He sprinted after them. Just as he was closing in, the hooded figure gently laid Padme in the fighter's cockpit. Obi-Wan ignited his saber. The figure casually turned, igniting a red saber. They clashed. The red light of the figure's lightsaber revealed his face. Anakin. It was Anakin. Kenobi fell back, not knowing how to process this. His eyes were unnaturally yellow, his saber bloody red. Anakin advanced. Obi-Wan, in shock, blocked again and again, but he was too fast. Vader's attacks were unnaturally fast, just as they once were, only now even faster and more aggressive. Suddenly, a rocket flew toward the veranda. Obi-Wan jumped back and landed on his back as the explosion swallowed Anakin. The smoke cleared, revealing Anakin's face, now a little burned as he stood over Obi-Wan. Suddenly, he turned and climbed into the cockpit. Obi-Wan watched with tears in his eyes as Anakin took off with unconscious Padme. Who knows where? Obi-Wan just laid on the veranda, not knowing how to feel, as the Republic fell in front of his eyes. In the Senate, Sidious stood once again before the shaken senators, at least the ones who were still alive. Anyone who will not accept the new leadership will be immediately terminated, Sidious said. Coruscant is now a system regulated and controlled by the Confederacy of Independent Systems, just like the rest of the galaxy. In order to ensure the future stability of the galaxy, the leading faction in this war, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, will be renamed and reorganized into the Unified Galactic Authority. There was no applause following the speech, just silence, cold and distant. In the following months, the galaxy once again fell completely under Sidious control, including Coruscant. Although the lower levels of the planet were hard to regulate and control, Vader took Padme to one of the Separatists' countless planets, where he mostly kept her in Bacta all the time. His obsession with keeping her alive was driving him insane, but Palpatine could only smile, as he knew that 2 potential apprentices, or Inquisitors, were on their way just for him. The Jedi Order was less than a fraction of what it once was. Their numbers were in the hundreds, but they kept fighting for democracy. But the new regime was too powerful, at least for now. Palpatine's control was far from complete, though. In fact, he struggled to maintain a grip on the entire galaxy. His original plan was to manipulate the Republic into willingly giving itself over to him. But sadly, that plan didn't go so well. So he was seen as a tyrant from both former factions. It was obvious he was struggling to keep control, and it wasn't getting any easier. Vader soon killed Tyrannus in cold blood. He had no further use. Sidious had a new apprentice, one far younger and more powerful, and together they would keep a tight grip on the galaxy. At least, that's what Palpatine believed. But the galaxy would fight back. It always would. And somewhere on Malachor, in a cold Sith tomb, Anakin was looking at unconscious Padme in a Bacta tank. He was crying, knowing this wasn't right, but he had to save her. Suddenly, he received a transmission. The Emperor had to speak with him. He turned and coldly paced toward the giant entrance of the temple, where the white sun was setting behind the smoke.